Keeping up appearances. So here goes. I'd been wanting to write this for months but kept deleting everything. It's too personal, too shameful. My name's Carol. I grew up in a tiny conservative town where my dad's the Baptist minister. You can imagine the pressure, always have to be perfect, always prim and proper. I was the girl who won church beauty pageants, wore knee-length skirts and never spoke out of turn. But underneath all that, God, I was so tired of pretending. I'd sneak kisses with out-of-town boys at football games, the thrill of getting away with something making my heart race. I was 19, started school late because of that long sickness that kept me home for a whole year. They called it a delicate constitution, like I was a porcelain doll. All that time stuck in bed, reading novels under the covers, imagining lives where girls weren't punished for wanting. The night it all started was my high school graduation party. Held at the church hall, but someone's older brother snuck in a bottle of gin and mixed it into the punch. My girlfriend Lynn, we'd been inseparable since sophomore year, though I never told her about the boys at football games, was sipping it like lemonade, her cheeks flushed pink by the third cup. I had 2 cups, just to be social. I told myself, the gin burning smooth down my throat. By 10 o'clock, she was leaning on me, giggling too loud, so I offered to take the wheel of her daddy's Chevrolet. I'd driven my dad's old Ford maybe half a dozen times, mostly on back roads, but confidence comes easy when you're tipsy and tired of being good. Backing up at the gas station, I didn't check the rearview mirror enough. The crunch was sickening, metal on metal, and my heart dropped to my stomach. When I stepped out, legs wobbly, there it was, a police car, fender dented, and Officer Amon standing beside it, flashlight in hand. He'd been friends with my older brother Tim since they were on the football team together, so I'd known him for years, always polite, always calling me kid with that easy grin. But that night, his smile was gone, replaced by a serious frown that made him look older, broader, his police uniform stretching tight across his muscular shoulders. I remembered being 13, hiding in the trees at Lake Willow, watching him make out with a college girl. His hand had slid under her tank top, cupping her breast, and she moaned into his mouth, her hair tangled in his fingers. He then reached up her skirt and drove her to squirm, but at the time I didn't understand what was happening. I'd stayed there until they left, cheeks burning, thighs pressed together, wondering what it would feel like to have someone touch me like that, someone strong, someone who knew what he wanted. Now, he approached the car, flashlight beam sweeping over my face. "Carol," he said, voice sharp. "You been drinking?" I opened my mouth to deny it, but Sergeant Marks, the other officer, came up behind him, sniffing the air like a bloodhound. "Smells like it," he said, eyeing my trembling hands. I begged them, pleaded, "My dad will lose his job if he finds out, please, I'll do anything," and Amon's jaw tightened, something flickering in his eyes I couldn't name. They took me to the station, a tiny brick building with 2 cells and an interrogation room that smelled like stale coffee and musk. In the interrogation room, they sat me down in a metal chair, cold against my bare legs. Amon left first, saying he needed to get the report started, but Sergeant Mark stayed, closing the door behind him. He was older than Amon, maybe late 30s, with a mustache that twitched when he talked. "Bad luck," he said, stepping closer, too close, his cologne mixing with the smell of cigarettes on his breath. "But we can fix this. No need for your daddy to ever know." He pulled out a pair of handcuffs, the metal clinking, and I flinched. "Just procedure," he said, but his hands were gentle as he cuffed my wrists to the armrests, too gentle, lingering over my pulse points, his thumbs brushing the sensitive skin there. I wore a lace bra underneath my dress, ivory-colored, with delicate embroidery along the cups that my mom would have called too fancy for every day. His eyes dropped to my chest, and I realized the neckline had slipped a little, showing the top edge of the lace. When he reached out, I thought he would pull it up, but instead, he ran a finger along the edge, tracing the embroidery. "Pretty," he murmured, and I froze, unsure if to pull away or lean in. His hand moved lower, skimming over my waist, the fabric of my dress thin under his palm. I should have been terrified, but there was a thrill there too, a forbidden heat building in my belly. No one had ever touched me like this, not the boys at football games, who'd only stolen quick kisses before looking over their shoulders. This was deliberate, bold, and part of me hated how much I didn't want it to stop. When he cupped my breast through the fabric, squeezing gently, I gasped, my back arching involuntarily. "Quiet," he said, thumb rubbing circles over my nipple, now stiff under the lace and cotton. "You want this, don't you? Little minister's daughter, all sweet and innocent, but I bet you're dripping under that pretty dress." I didn't answer, couldn't, too busy fighting the shame and the want warring inside me. His other hand slid up my thigh, pushing the dress higher, higher, until he could feel the top of my stockings, the elastic band digging into my skin. My panties were cotton, white, plain, but his fingers pressed against them anyway, and I bit my lip to keep from moaning. This was wrong, so wrong, but the danger of it, the fact that one wrong move could ruin everything, made it so exciting for me. When he finally stepped back, I was shaking, my wrists sore from the handcuffs, my mind reeling. "Be here tomorrow with $5 for the paint job," he said, voice rough. "And don't tell anyone. Unless you want your daddy to hear about how you acted tonight." The next day, I borrowed the money from my graduation gifts, stuffing the bill into my purse. I wore a simple cotton blouse, powder blue, and a knee-length skirt, brown tweed, hoping to look innocent, unassuming. But when I walked into the station, Amon was the only one there, sitting at the desk, legs propped up. "Mark's had to run an errand," he said, standing up, towering over me. "Come on, let's sort this out." He led me to a back room, not the interrogation room but a storage closet, crowded with boxes and the faint smell of mothballs. When he shut the door, my heart started racing. This was different, more intimate. Amon had always been the nice one, the one who'd ruffle my hair and ask about school, but now he was staring at me like I was something to be devoured, and I didn't hate it. "You know we could have ruined you last night," he said, stepping closer, his hand brushing my hip. "But I told Marks to go easy. You're Tim's sister after all." His touch was different from Marks's, firmer, more confident, like he knew exactly where to touch to make me shiver. I could feel the heat of his body through my blouse, and when he tilted my chin up, I didn't resist. His lips met mine, rough and urgent, tongue pushing past my lips, and I kissed him back, all the pent-up frustration from years of being perfect pouring out. His hand slid under my blouse, warm against my back, unhooking my bra with one hand, the ivory lace, and I gasped into his mouth as he cupped my breast, thumb flicking over my nipple. "I knew you'd be responsive," he murmured, pulling back to look at me, my bra now hanging loose, breast spilling over the cups. "All that innocence is just an act, isn't it, Carol?" I didn't answer. He started to undo his pants as I watched. What came out I will never forget. He was massive. It wasn't even hard yet, and it was still thicker than anything I could imagine. He pushed my shoulders down and I knelt in front of him, his manhood just above my head. It pulsed and slowly started to get even bigger. This was Amon, the boy I'd crushed on for years, and I wanted to please him, to show him I wasn't just a good girl, but I didn't know what to do. He guided the tip into my mouth and I opened up for him, tentative at first, but then I took his head in and his groan of approval emboldened me, and I let myself get lost in the moment, the taste of him, the feel of his hand in my hair, guiding me. I was progressively getting wetter down there and could feel that I was getting dizzy with exhilaration. He started to press into my mouth harder now and I moved the way I thought he would like me to, and he started to breathe faster. He then held my head and said, "Swallow what I give you." Swallow, I thought, what could he mean by that, and then it happened. An explosion, a torrent of something hitting the back of my throat. I coughed and pulled my head away, then he grabbed my head and reinserted his member and stroked back and forth. I tried to swallow as much as I could, but there was so much of it, it was dripping down my neck. He groaned loudly. The taste was something I had never experienced before, bitter yet sweet and thoroughly strange. But I told myself to be a good girl and please him, so I did what I was told, then the swallowing became easier. I kept going until he had nothing more to give and he was winded. I was wet down there, totally disgusted yet buzzing with pleasure. I couldn't understand what was going on. How could I feel all of these things at the same time? After I cleaned up in the bathroom, he met me in the hallway and held me tight. This was the first time I felt such comfort and security. This strong and handsome man, with complete power over me, was holding me close. It was so nice. This was the first secret we'd share, a bond that tied us together, dangerous and thrilling. In the following week, he found excuses to see me. He appeared out of nowhere, just to diddle me between my panties, then leave. He would steal kisses, spank me on my rear and wink at me. The playfulness was driving me wild with desire. I kept thinking back to when I had his thing in my mouth and for some reason, wanted to feel that again. The next meeting was one that I will never forget, one that would change me forever. It was at a dive bar called the Rusty Nail, a place I'd never seen before. Amon told me to skip out of Bible study and meet him there at 8. He said it was urgent, and I lied to my mom, saying Lynn needed help with a project. I wore a white cotton dress, tight at the waist, flared skirt, and underneath my regular cotton panties. When I walked in, Amon was waiting by the bar, but the place was mostly empty. He didn't greet me, just nodded to a back room, his expression serious. I took his hand and he led me. Inside, there were men, maybe 10, maybe more, sitting in chairs, smoking, their eyes on me. I froze, but Amon's hand on the small of my back pushed me forward. "Don't be shy," he murmured, handing me a paper bag. "Put this on." Inside was a black silk slip, sheer, almost see-through, with lace trim along the neckline and hem. I looked at him, panicked, but his gaze was unyielding. "Do it." I told him I didn't want to, but he reminded me that we had an agreement, and I nodded. I was terrified of what was going to happen, but looking at the clothes in the bag, I was curious about what I would look like in them. I changed behind a tattered curtain, hands shaking, the silk sliding over my skin like water. The slip clung to my curves, the lace brushing my nipples, already sensitive from the cold air. When I saw myself in the mirror, I was astonished. I looked so much older and sexy. I was still shaking, but I secretly loved the way I looked. I was like a dress-up doll, all pretty for everyone to see. When I stepped out, I saw a wooden table on stage and I saw the men shifting in their seats. Amon was there on stage and he embraced me. I kept looking at the men in the seats. He started to dance with me, twirling me and dipping me. It felt strange until he turned me around and held my arms behind me. He started to move his hands over my belly and then to my breast, massaging it. I was still terrified and so ashamed, but his hands felt warm over my body, and the juxtaposition of his hands caressing and the embarrassment of the act was driving my mind crazy and making me dripping wet down there. Then he led me over to the table. There were handcuffs on 2 of the corners. My eyes widened. He bent me over the table and then took one of my hands and cuffed it. I shook my head no, pleading with Amon. He ignored me and cuffed the other. I was completely exposed, bare for everyone to see. Amon started to manipulate my slit and felt the wetness already on his fingers. He pulled down my panties and inserted a finger into me and I screamed. The crowd rustled and were getting agitated. He moved his large finger in and out and I screeched and moaned. I was getting even wetter and more excited. Again, my head getting dizzy with pleasure. I kept thinking how everyone was watching me and it made me go crazy. Then Amon stopped. I looked back and he was undoing his pants. A huge bulge had pushed a mound up in his pants and he slowly freed it. I could see that it was completely erect and stiff. I think I yelled no, but I'm not sure, because at the time I was so excited and buzzed. He pushed into my wetness and pushed hard. It wouldn't go in, but he pushed further and inch by inch he was filling me up. There was a sharp pain and I said stop. My back was completely arched. Amon paused for almost 20 seconds, an eternity, until I calmed my back muscles and my breasts touched the table again, and then he proceeded. The next several minutes were a blur. He dominated me, taking what he wanted with such force. The aching in my stomach started to build and I had what I now know was my first climax. It was mind-shattering and I yelled out so loudly. He kept going and I had wave after wave of climax. It was incredible. The shame and anger I felt and how helpless I felt made my body feel such an intense pleasure. Then I heard Amon breathing speed up and I knew something was close. He blew up so hard into my body, it felt like being shot with a cannon. He convulsed and jerked, gripping my hips so tight. When he finally slowed down, I could feel the drippings flow down the insides of my thigh. It was amazing. Aman uncuffed me, picked me up like I weighed nothing, and carried me back behind the curtains. It was over. The single greatest, no, the most frustrating experience of my life. I hated what happened to me, but at the same time, it was Aman, the man I was falling for, doing it to me, and it was the most intense pleasure I had ever experienced, even to this day. In the days after, Aman and we started dating, in a way, secret dates, of course. He picked me up in his cop car, drove to a diner an hour away where no one knew us, held my hand across the table like we were any normal couple. We'd watch movies at the drive-in, snuggled under a blanket, his hand resting on my thigh, thumb rubbing circles on a spot that made me squirm. But the best moments were the ones where the danger crept in, the times he would pull over on a deserted road and make me pleasure him with my mouth. I learned quickly what pleased him, and making him happy was the only thing that mattered now. Summer came, and I got a job at the Grand Hotel downtown, working the front desk. It was a nice place, all polished wood and chandeliers, and I wore a starched white blouse and a navy blue skirt, hemmed just below the knee, per the dress code. But under it, I always wore something for him: lacy panties, a silk camisole, anything that made me feel connected to the secret part of my life. One afternoon, I saw him walk in, uniform sharp, sunglasses on, and my heart skipped a beat. He approached the desk, all business. "I need a room for the night, miss." I handed him a key, 302, top floor, quiet, and when he brushed my hand, I felt a thrill run through me. An hour later, I told my coworker I was taking a break and slipped upstairs. The room was dim, curtains drawn, and he was waiting by the window, handcuffs in hand. "Heard you've been a bad girl, working here looking so proper," he said, voice teasing but with an undercurrent of heat. I wore a blue silk bra that day, with delicate embroidery along the cups, and matching panties, the fabric smooth against my skin. He bought them for me, slipped them into my bag during a drive-in movie, and I'd worn them every day since, waiting for the right moment. I presented myself to him, at attention. He said, "Take it off," with a low voice, leaving no room for argument. I hesitated, fingers trembling as I reached and started to undo my blouse. "Aman, then he interjected. I said take it off slowly." There was a flicker in his eyes, something that made my belly clench. Not fear, exactly. Anticipation. The cool air hit my shoulders, my collarbones. His eyes had moved over me like he was drinking me in, and I'd felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I hadn't looked away. Couldn't look away. He stepped closer, reached out, and his finger had traced the edge of my bra, right where the lace met my skin. I gasped, the touch electric, and he smirked, low and knowing. "Pretty," he murmured, and the word had been a caress itself. "Did you put this on for me? All this lace, hiding such a sweet little secret?" I didn't answer. What could I have said? He stepped back, sat on the edge of the bed, and motioned for me to turn. So I had, my back to him, and I'd heard the sharp intake of his breath when he saw the panties, the way they dipped low on my hips. "The bra," he said, and my hands had gone to the clasp behind my back, fumbling. It had taken 3 tries before it clicked open, and the lace had fallen away, my breasts spilling free. I heard him shift on the bed, a low, rough sound in his throat, and I felt a thrill shoot through me, pride, shame, desire all tangled up. "Come here," he said, and I'd turned, walked to him on legs that had felt like water. He pulled me between his knees, his hands on my hips and thighs, stroking softly the flesh there. "You'd been naughty," he said, looking up at me, and his voice had been a growl now, showing up like this. "Making me want to bend you over and teach you a lesson." I bit my lip, but a whimper had escaped anyway. The thought of it, of him taking control, of not having to be perfect, just to be possessed by him, made me dizzy. I stammered, but he shook his head, cutting me off. "Shut up," he said, standing suddenly, so I'd had to crane my neck to meet his eyes. "You didn't come here to talk." His kiss was rough, all teeth and tongue, and I'd melted into it, letting him take what he wanted. His hands were everywhere, on my ass, pulling me against him, sliding up my back, tangling in my hair. I felt the hardness of him through his uniform pants, hot and growing massive. I started to grind against him, desperate for friction, for more. He broke the kiss, stepped back to undo his belt, and I'd watched, hypnotized, as he pulled it free, exposing the stiff monster. My mouth opened with awe. "Kneel," he said, and I sank to the carpet, my knees pressing into the rough fibers. The memory of our first time rushed back, and I remembered the weight of it, the way it filled my mouth, the way he tasted. "Take it," he said, and I wrapped my hand around him, slow, feeling the velvet skin over the steel, the pulse beneath my fingers. I'd leaned in, pressed a kiss to the tip, and he hissed. Then I took him into my mouth, deep, letting him hit the back of my throat, and he groaned, the sound vibrating through me. "Good girl," he murmured, guiding my head, "that's it, take it all." I'd done my best, hollowing my cheeks, swirling my tongue, letting the wet heat of my mouth work him. I'd loved the way he lost control, how his breathing had gotten ragged, how his grip on my hair had tightened just enough to sting. I'd loved that I could make him feel like that beneath the uniform and the badge, he'd been just a man, and I'd been the one who pleased him and he was the one that possessed me. Suddenly, he pulled me off, breathing hard, his cock glistening. "Up," he said, pulling me to my feet, on the bed, "hands above your head." I'd climbed onto the mattress, my heart racing, as he pulled the handcuffs from his belt. The metal had been cold against my wrists as he clicked them, securing my hands to the bedpost. I felt completely helpless, exposed, and it made me gush down there. I was soaking. Amon stripped quickly and then got onto the bed. He pulled my panties down and threw them over his head. He split my legs wide open, his mouth on my neck, biting down hard enough to leave a mark. I gasped, arching into him, as his hand had slid over my thighs. I could feel his hardness pressing up against my opening. "So what?" he muttered, rubbing circles over me, and I hadn't been able to help it. I bucked against his rod, desperate for more. "You like this, don't you?" Being tied up, told what to do. "No," I said, the word was a surrender. "Please, Amon." He hadn't needed to be told twice. He lined himself up, pressed in slowly, the head of his cock breaching my entrance. I was so wet, it slid in with much less pain now, and he drove in hard, filling me in one stroke. I'd cried out, being stretched out so much, but he didn't stop. He started to set a brutal pace, hips slamming into mine, each thrust hitting so deep that I started to see stars. "Look at me," he growled, and I forced my eyes open, met his stare, dark, hungry, and possessive. "You are mine now, you're mine." I'd nodded, because it was true. In that moment, there was no minister's daughter, no perfect Carol. There was just his hands, his voice, the way he made me feel like I was burning from the inside out. The pressure had built, a tight coil in my belly, and I chanted his name like a prayer, each thrust bringing me closer, closer to that moment. Then the dam broke, a wave of pleasure so intense it had stole my breath, my body convulsing, my vision going white. Then just a moment later, I felt him tense, heard his groan as he blew up inside me, spilling a torrent of pressure, hot and thick, very slick. It was so slick inside me. He collapsed on top of me. Heavy, solid, his rod still stretching me. For a long moment, we lay there, panting, his heart pounding against my chest. We stayed there for several minutes just kissing. Then he undid my handcuffs and threw me a towel. I cleaned up and we were back in each other's arms. I traced the line of his jaw with my finger. "I'm in love with you," I said in a whisper. "I love you too," was his reply, and he kissed me deeply. I was in heaven. It was the way he held me, the way he looked at me like I was something precious, even after he tore me apart. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't care. I was there in his arms and that was enough. More than enough. Because in his embrace, I wasn't just a good girl. I was his good girl, and that was the only label that mattered. College came too soon. I packed my bags, filled with sensible sweaters and knee-length skirts, but buried at the bottom were the lace bras and silk slips, reminders of the summer that had changed everything. At Radcliffe, I joined the St. Mary's Society, a club for Christian women, and played the part, attended prayers, volunteered at the church, smiled politely at the boys who asked me to dances. But none of them made my heart race like Amon did, none of them knew the secret I carried. Every time I came home, I'd call him from a payphone, voice low, and he'd meet me somewhere quiet, the old mill, the lookout point, once even in the back seat of his cop car during a rainstorm. We'd talk, kiss, and sometimes, more. He'd bring me new lingerie, wrapped in brown paper, no notes needed, and I'd wear it under my Sunday dresses, feeling the lace against my skin, a secret just for us.